Picture this moment. You've finally broken free from their control. The narcissist who once held power over your emotions, your decisions, your very sense of what's real, suddenly realizes something terrifying. You've won. But here's what Carl Jung discovered about this moment that will shock you. What happens next might be the most dangerous phase you'll ever face. Jung identified a pivotal moment in every narcissistic relationship that he called the recognition of defeat. But here's what most people don't realize. This moment isn't about the narcissist accepting loss. It's about them recognizing that you've achieved something they believed was impossible. You've become psychologically independent. Carl Jung said, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." But what happens when one person transforms so completely that they're no longer vulnerable to psychological manipulation? The narcissist realizes you've won when they can no longer trigger your emotional reactions. They can't make you question your own reality anymore. They can't control your responses through guilt, shame, or fear. They can't extract the emotional energy they desperately need to maintain their false self. This is where Jung's insights become truly chilling. Within every human mind exists what he called the shadow, the collection of repressed, denied aspects of personality. For the narcissist, their shadow contains something terrifying, the truth of their own inadequacy, their deep shame, and their fundamental emptiness. When a narcissist realizes they've lost control over you, they experience what Jung described as shadow confrontation. Their carefully built false self begins to crumble, and the shadow emerges with devastating force. Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." For the narcissist, your victory forces them into an unwanted confrontation with their darkness, and they will fight this awareness with everything they have. Jung identified 3 distinct stages that occur when a narcissist realizes their psychological dominance has ended. Understanding these stages could be the difference between maintaining your freedom and getting pulled back into their web of control. Stage 1. Complete disbelief. The narcissist's first response is total disbelief. Their ego cannot accept that someone they viewed as inferior has gained the upper hand. This triggers what Jung called compensatory mechanisms, desperate attempts to restore the old dynamic. They'll test you with increasingly desperate tactics, sudden displays of vulnerability or change, escalated aggression and blame, attempts to recreate past trauma responses, love-bombing behaviors mixed with punishment. Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." The narcissist senses you've claimed this privilege, and it terrifies them because it exposes their own fake identity. Stage 2. Mass shadow projection. This is the most dangerous stage. When the narcissist can no longer maintain their psychological superiority, they enter what Jung termed mass shadow projection. Everything they hate about themselves, their emptiness, their shame, their inadequacy, gets projected onto you with unprecedented intensity. This stage is marked by smear campaigns that seem to emerge from nowhere, accusations that mirror their own behavior exactly, attempts to turn others against you, gaslighting that becomes increasingly desperate and obvious. Jung said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." The narcissist's accusations during this phase are actually a perfect map of their own psychological wounds, but they're too fragmented to see it. Stage 3. The point of no return. When a narcissist realizes they've definitively lost their hold over you, they face what Jung described as psychological death, the complete collapse of their false identity. Jung discovered this stage manifests in one of 2 ways: complete withdrawal and what he called narcissistic hibernation, or a final explosive attempt at psychological destruction. He said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. The narcissist, faced with this prospect, will often choose to destroy rather than accept. This is when they become most dangerous, not because they're strong, but because they have nothing left to lose. Why your victory triggers such extreme reactions? Jung understood that narcissistic patterns develop as a defense against profound feelings of inadequacy and shame. The narcissist creates a false self, a grandiose identity that requires constant validation and control over others to maintain. Jung said, "The persona is a complicated system of relations between individual consciousness and society. For the narcissist, this persona is everything. Without it, they believe they are nothing. When you were under their influence, you served as what Jung would call a mirror for their false self. Your emotional reactions, your dependency, your trauma responses, all of this reflected the image of power and control they desperately needed to see. But when you've won, when you've reclaimed your psychological sovereignty, that mirror shatters. Suddenly, they see not a powerful manipulator, but what Jung described as the wounded child beneath the mask. This moment triggers what he called existential panic, the terror of facing one's true self without defenses. The neurochemical reality, what Jung observed psychologically, modern neuroscience has confirmed biochemically. The narcissist's realization of defeat triggers massive neurochemical changes. Their brain floods with stress hormones that impair rational thinking. Primitive brain centers associated with survival are activated. Normal emotional regulation systems get disrupted. Jung said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." From a neurochemical perspective, the narcissist's brain is literally designed to avoid this acceptance. This is why their reactions can seem so extreme and irrational. But here's what Jung understood about your neurochemical changes. Your victory over narcissistic manipulation creates profound positive changes throughout your entire being. Successful resistance triggers increased production of confidence-building neurotransmitters. Neural pathways associated with self-trust strengthen. Your stress response and emotional regulation improve dramatically. Jung said, "Your vision becomes clear when you look into your heart." Victory over narcissistic manipulation literally clears the neurochemical fog that kept you confused and reactive. Protecting yourself. During the dangerous phase, Jung discovered that when you've achieved psychological victory over a narcissist, you're in what he called a position of dangerous strength. You've claimed your authentic power, but this very authenticity can trigger their most primitive defenses. Jung said, "Knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darknesses of other people." Stay aware of their projection attempts without absorbing them. Avoid the savior complex. There's often a temptation to try to help them through their collapse. Jung warned that this is usually the false self trying to reassert control through your compassion. Expect escalation. Psychological systems fight hardest just before they transform or die. Document everything. From Jung's perspective, their desperate acts during this phase reveal their true character more clearly than ever before. Most importantly, trust your individuation process. Jung called the journey toward authentic selfhood individuation. Your victory represents successful individuation despite their interference. Trust this process completely. The larger meaning. Jung made one crucial observation about this phase. Narcissistic dynamics don't exist in isolation. They're part of what he called the collective unconscious, shared psychological patterns that influence entire communities and cultures. When a narcissist realizes they've lost control over you, they often try to mobilize collective forces against you. Flying monkeys emerge, people who unconsciously identify with patterns like the loyal soldier or the rescuer. Social manipulation intensifies. They may try to use legal systems, workplaces, or community organizations as weapons. Jung said, The individual has always had to struggle not to be overwhelmed by the tribe. When you've won against a narcissist, you're fighting not just them, but unconscious patterns that support their type of psychological dominance. Your victory over narcissistic manipulation represents what Jung saw as completion of the hero's journey, the archetypal pattern of growth, challenge, transformation, and return. Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." By winning against the narcissist, you've not only reclaimed your authentic self, you've become what Jung called individuated. This isn't just personal healing. It's a contribution to humanity's psychological development. You've proven that authentic selfhood can triumph over even sophisticated manipulation. You've demonstrated that truth is ultimately more powerful than illusion. If this resonates with your experience, remember this: your capacity to recognize narcissistic manipulation is itself evidence that you're already on the path to victory. The very fact that you can see the game means you're no longer completely trapped in it. Jung taught that the psyche naturally moves toward healing and wholeness when given the opportunity. Your growing awareness, your increasing ability to trust your perceptions, your courage to value your own experience over external validation, these are all signs that this natural healing process is already underway. Your victory isn't just possible. According to Jung's understanding of human psychological development, it's inevitable. The authentic self will not be denied indefinitely, and your true nature will ultimately assert itself regardless of the obstacles placed in its path. You've activated what Jung called the self, that deeper center of personality that exists beyond ego manipulation and social conditioning. This self cannot be destroyed, controlled, or diminished by external forces because it draws its power from the deepest sources of psychological life. Your individuation represents this eternal principle in action, the triumph of authentic being over false manipulation, of truth over illusion, of integration over fragmentation. Your story doesn't end with victory over the narcissist. It begins there. Everything that follows is the unfolding of a life lived from your authentic center, contributing your unique gifts to the world while continuing to grow in wisdom and compassion. If this message spoke to something deep inside you, don't keep it to yourself. Like, share, and subscribe, not just for more content, but to join a growing space where truth, healing, and self-discovery matter. This is Psyche Thera, and your journey is just beginning.